Hello again, my friends, and welcome to another edition of the Royal Ramble. It is a very special edition today. We are officially on the road to WrestleMania, and with WrestleMania comes its array of surprises, and I actually have one myself today. Joining me right now is a familiar voice to many of you. He used to be the host of Sunday Night's Main Event Radio, now McGuire on Wrestling. He's been in broadcasting and wrestling commentary for over 20 years now, I believe. Mike McGuire. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having. I can't wait to find out who the special guest is.
It's always special when I have a guest, but it's especially special today.
No, I appreciate that, man. No, thanks for asking. And road to WrestleMania. It's definitely here. I'm excited.
Yeah, so first, before we talk about WrestleMania, I know that a lot of my listeners especially know you from your days on SNME,
Right.
but some are newer to the program, so may not be as familiar. Can you give me a little bit of your background and talk about some of your history, like how you got started in the business?
In radio or just wrestling? Or
yeah, just wrestling radio broadcasting.
Okay. Well, I actually was involved in wrestling before I even got involved in radio. That was always Plan A until my body said no. So I actually used to hang around with indie wrestling promoters and small shows that would come through my town. Like I grew up in Red Deer, Alberta, and that was the first indie experience I had was with a promotion here called Can-Am Wrestling, and they would come through town. So I would help set up the ring, and a couple of guys would, befriend me and show me how to do simple little things. And then I went to Edmonton for radio school after I got hurt working a retail job, because, that's the coolest story ever, is I got hurt working retail. But I did. I tore my back up considerably, and at the time I thought I was doing great. Went to college, took some upgrading, and there was a promotion called the Prairie Wrestling Alliance out there, which had a bunch of names that have gone on to do great things come through at the time. I mean, next to the 2000s iteration of Stampede Wrestling, that's where Natty and TJ and Harry Smith and, even the Sings, from who people know as Jinder Mahal or Raj Singh in TNA and tons of other names have come through and gone on to do great things. So I really started getting to know the ins and outs of the business there. And then I did what every college radio student wrestling fan does, and I leached on to a wrestling radio show, and then eventually took that over. And then honestly, I kind of got away from it for a bit. I would still come back and ring announce and check out the occasional show and stuff like that, but I was really, really focusing on my radio career at the time. Then fast forward a bunch of years, I end up in Regina, Saskatchewan, of all places, and I find a promotion there called High Impact Wrestling, and I got involved with them, started doing some show stuff, started doing some production, started doing some video work, and then eventually the whole commentary thing kind of came up. At the time, I was working at a radio station that was really kind of, I'll just say, a rather challenging environment to be in. I don't know whose fault it is, but at the end of it, it just became kind of a place where I realized that wrestling was really bringing me a lot more fun than anything else was. And so that kind of helped me survive my time in Regina. And then I moved up to Saskatoon for a bit, did the same thing, worked with them, worked with some other folks. And I was actually working in Saskatoon. COVID came, and the company I was working with held me on throughout the entire pandemic. And then once it ended, of course, they had to recoup their budgets, and I was already hired as a redundancy when I got there. So to have stayed through the whole pandemic, I kind of knew things were going to come up, and they did. So I'm sitting at home. I'm like, hey, I don't know what I want to do now. Do I want to even try another radio job? Because at the time, Canadian media, as we know, is shrinking almost on a daily basis, it seems. So I'd reached out to Jason Agnew, who was then the owner of Sunday Night's Main Event, and I said, look, I just set up a home studio, and it was a pretty nice setup at the time, and I said, I got all this stuff, man, I have some chops, I don't know what I want to do, but if you need a guy to pull clips from Raw, and send them to you, I'll happily do that, I don't care. I said, obviously I'd like to get involved from a show standpoint. He had a plan laid out because he was actually planning on passing the show over to someone else to Dan the Mouth Labransky, of course, a legend in the business, and Dan one day just kind of eventually said, "Yeah, I don't really want to do that." And so it went from me sending a demo to Jason for anything to him calling me about not even a week later, saying, "So here's what happened. I had this plan laid out, and after hearing your demo, I think you're the guy to take over this show." I was like, "Holy shnikes, I had no idea." So did that show for a while, and it was interesting because at the time it had some clout with the branding of, quote, TSN Radio, which used to be a national entity and now is very, very limited in its distribution. And it just kind of became this thing where it was like, okay, I'm a wrestling radio guy now. This feels good. This is what I want to do. At the same time, I just met up with the Hart family and had discussed with them about coming on to do something. And there was a conversation with Brett and his son Dallas, and I was telling somebody else the other day, I have this audio still because it happened after I did an interview with them about the launch of Dungeon Wrestling, and Brett says to me flat out, "You should be the voice for this," and I was like, So, again, it all just kind of came out of nowhere. So we started doing PPVs and TV and stuff, and well, not TV, but direct to YouTube and stuff like that. And I got brought in with commentary. A couple guys came in with me. They're on my podcast network now. Mitch and Dimitri, they're hilarious, but they're business guys, and they're just learning the chops of commentary. So I'm kind of getting to take them under my wing a bit and say, hey, here's how we can get in, get out, and all that stuff. So the broadcast experience comes in. Go back to the other show. Jason sold the rights to someone else. Yeah. And I wish I could tell you what really happened, but one day it just kind of came down to this isn't feeling right. And so McGuire on Wrestling was launched. And since then, it's been this nice, slow little build with the show. And honestly, you hear all sorts of things, but when Agnew brought me on originally, I didn't want money. I didn't want clout. I barely received either. Don't get me wrong. Jason at least, had a payment distribution and stuff like that. We did well off Patreon and stuff like that. But for me, it wasn't about any of that. For me, it was just getting to talk about wrestling. That's all I've cared about doing. And I realized just this past couple of years that I always thought I was a radio guy that liked talking about wrestling. And it's the exact opposite. I'm a wrestling guy that likes doing radio. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So I've really leaned in on that over the last couple of years. I started working with other promotions across Canada. They'll bring me in to do, just ring announcing or commentary or whatever, both. It doesn't matter. Again, I don't take myself too seriously when it comes to that. It's just an opportunity to learn and grow. And, I've sent some of my tape to some of the biggest production names out there, and I've gotten feedback, and I've told, what I got to do to get better. Am I constantly harassing, Michael Cole down in WWE or producers at AEW? No, but I've sent emails and I've gotten responses, so it's neat. But overall, getting this path of getting some credibility as someone who kind of knows his stuff about wrestling. I'm not going to say I'm the be-all, end-all expert, but also has the ability to communicate it like we are right now, I think is a fun combination to have, because I try and make wrestling relatable to everybody, not just diehards like you and me. And I mean, you're more diehard than I am, man. I see your posts, and it's like I can just count on an encyclopedia post from Blaine to come up every time because you know so much stuff.
And that's my gimmick.
Guys like Greg Oliver and even guys like John Pollock, who I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've only talked to John a few times, handful there, but I mean, that guy just strikes me as one of those guys that has an eidetic memory, just stats on stats on stats and everything. I'm I admire those guys greatly because, I even have to Google stuff for my own show just to try and remember the details in order. But I think the passion is there, and I think passion combined with the ability to communicate is what puts me in my own little spot here. So hopefully that answered your question. That was a very long, drawn-out answer to your question.
No, well, I do tend to ask very open-ended questions, so that definitely answered most of what I was asking there.
I felt honestly like I was talking to a Hart family member there, because normally you ask one question and they'll give you a 30-minute answer.
I've had my conversations with the Harts as well, or at least some of them.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, man.
It's interesting that you bring up John Pollock. I actually used to work with him at Fight Network when I was interning there, and I sat in when he was doing a radio, like a voiceover or something for The Score. And I was listening to him the whole time. I'm like, I can never do what this guy does.
Well, what I like about them, and it was funny because, I mean, I don't know the history between them, and, I knew Jason's side of it a little bit, but, I mean, that original live audio wrestling thing, I mean, that was what most of us, I think, that are radio and wrestling fans grew up listening to, and so for me to even have been a part of a knockoff, one of those things, like, they went and did their thing with Post, which is incredible. That the empire they've built out of that is amazing. And then for Jason to look at it from the entertainment standpoint and still have it be a viable broadcast element at the time was also great. So for me, I'm kind of doing this weird hybrid now where the radio company I work for is all for McGuire on wrestling, and so I keep saying we're working on it. This stuff moves slower than molasses, man, because you got to go through national channels and everything, but the plan for me and the hope is to expand the show and get more ears on it, obviously, but it's never going to be to discredit anything that guys like what John and Wade do. I mean, they're wrestling news guys. I like to think I'm hosting a fun talk show about wrestling.
Yeah.
Where they'll give you the stats and the ditties. I'm going to come at you with, I don't want to say a Letterman-esque approach because I don't do an opening monologue or anything, but having some nice recourse about wrestling and some nice conversation about it rather than getting too deep into the weeds. And there's times you have to, you know what I mean? But the rest of the time, I'm just like, let's have some fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there needs to be some kind of medium between that. Like, obviously you want to get the news out there, but you want also, like, there should be a little bit of banter between, especially if there's like multiple hosts. You yourself, I think you're going solo for the most part. I'm going solo. But like occasionally you have like a lead and then like a color, like it is kind of like wrestling commentary. You have a play-by-play guy and a color commentator. You kind of like want to see the banter back and forth. With me, I mean, I've been listening to the SNME / The Law for over 20 years now. So I've known these guys for a while. I worked with a couple of them. And it's just, I found that with the transition, into different, like Jason Agnew brought on different hosts like yourself, Boris and Matt, who he personally endorsed. But then you have a lot of other hosts that we don't really know too much about. And I feel like they've kind of taken on too much too soon in that sense.
Yeah, it's out of my, I honestly couldn't tell you. We're just kind of working in our little sandbox here now. And honestly, it's just, I've got a guy named Andy Evans who was part of the Squared Circle podcast for 20 years out in the UK. And so he's delivering a neat show because it's a perspective with that little bit of European flair. You know what I mean? He's a little more cut to the quick, which I enjoy. And then my guys, my co-commentators here in Mitch and Dimitri, these guys are the exact opposite of what most wrestling fans look for from a wrestling podcast. But I love it because they're funny. They don't take anything seriously. And it's just a couple guys. To me, it's like just having a sports show hosted by dudes, which is what another thing they do. They do an actual sports show very similar to what they do on the Ultimate Commentary Table. But they don't come in pretending to know it all, and they don't have to put on airs about it. We make fun of Mitch all the time because he gets so many names wrong. Like, he means well, but he just, I don't know if it's just a glitch in his brain or what, but he's like, he'll get it. He knows exactly who he's talking about, and if you listen, you figure out who he's talking about. But overall, it's just this fun little thing we play. We're actually going to make a poster of all the pseudonyms that he's given actual wrestlers, and just have some fun with it. Maybe make it look like one of those indie posters from back in the day where you'd have people that were like impersonating WWE guys or something. But like Brian the Brain Heenan and we came up with Jake the Snail Robinson, and anyway, it's
amazing.
So it's just honestly, I don't worry about what other shows are doing, and I enjoyed what I did there when I was there, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now because I never got into this to take it seriously, and that's why I like to take it that seriously. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So if I'm going to charge money for anything, I'm going to make sure people get something for it, and they're going to get, we don't ask for a penny off this thing, and we're going to keep it that way. If you're going to pay for something, you're going to buy a t-shirt, which I think we might actually lose money on. I don't know. But I don't care. If you want to support the show, hell, I'll lose the cut, because to me, it's just, again, it's about wrestling fans getting together.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it should be all about. And with that, I wanted to kind of transition into our discussion regarding WrestleMania. So the card is, most of the card has started to take shape. I think we know a lot of the top matches now. So I'm not going to focus on every single match. I just wanted to talk about some of the top stories heading into the WrestleMania event. And starting with the WWE World Championship match, Seth Rollins to defend on night 2 against Drew McIntyre. Now, this is a match that we've seen maybe a couple of times already in the last few months. And each of those matches kind of resulted the same. I think there was a little bit of kind of restructuring after the CM Punk injury.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel that this story kind of needs a bit more of a hook heading into the biggest show of the year?
I don't know. I think, honestly, this match is chugging along just fine. And, again, my expectations are a lot lower, I think, than some wrestling fans are. Mm-hmm. At the end of it, I want to kind of wait and see what happens once we get there. I love this iteration of Drew McIntyre.
Yeah, exactly.
This feels like the guy being very real, very natural. He's got a bit of his actual opinion in there. He's got a bit of an actual attitude, and deservedly so. Let's not forget, we were all pushing for this guy to be the guy, and then COVID came, and he won the world title at WrestleMania the worst way you possibly could, with no fans. And, you know, when he won the Royal Rumble, like, go back to that, man. I mean, this guy has proven that he was a commodity then. And that's when he was doing the forced promos and you know, not being as edgy and not being as maybe inside, you know. So now I feel we have this Drew McIntyre that's literally wearing a T-shirt that says "Take out CM Punk, win the Royal Rumble," you know, like go on to main event WrestleMania and you know, win the title. I'm like, that's brilliant. Why wouldn't you go for that? Because this, to me, is this makes perfect sense. Sorry, win the Elimination Chamber. Right. But you know, it's one of those things where if you have a guy who wasn't supposed to be the guy to begin with, you know, because everybody figured it was going to be Punk Rollins, and that made perfect sense given what was going on. I think that making Punk a more sympathetic figure helps. Drew's not an idiot. He knows how to do business, so he's going to do what he can to get that over. And then Seth Rollins, I think it's time for Seth to either be in the chase for the championship or have a new, more dangerous foe waiting in the wings. But to do that, he's got to get past Drew McIntyre. So, I mean, if Drew McIntyre was the plan B when they probably weren't running a plan B until they had to, I think they've done all right with it. I think it's probably going to be overpowered by Cody and Roman, obviously, and then you've got the tag match on night 1. But I don't think it's slipping. I just think that it's a solid B title match, you know?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you bring up Drew's new character. I'm a huge fan of this as well. I think it's something that he's desperately needed for a while now. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you feel the same, but it kind of reminds me of, you know, when Triple H first started this big heel run as a top guy, when he was complaining about like how he was held back for years because of that, what happened with the Clique in Madison Square Garden. I kind of feel like it's the same kind of pattern with Drew.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of that in there. I think there's also a lot of, quote, reality, which I always question what's really real and what isn't. Just because you heard somebody, you know, just because you heard he stormed out of the ring and stormed into the locker room and everything else. I mean, did he really, though? Like, were we really there? Let's not forget, this is a multi-billion-dollar organization here. If they want to tell any story, they can. Mm-hmm. And so when it gets to the nitty-gritty of all these details, I think that wrestling fans are being more fooled than they think they are. And I'm all for it. I'm all for not knowing what's going on because I don't need to know what's going to happen. I'd like to have some idea of who's going to be where when I watch a show, and that's about it, you know? Yeah. I want to see more matches advertised all the time. That goes for every show. Right. But as for, well, this has to happen this way, let the story play out.
Yeah. And then, of course, we know that CM Punk is going to be in the house coming Monday on Raw. He's in Chicago, which makes sense. It's his hometown. Do you expect him to have any kind of influence? I mean, I've heard actual rumors, and I'm not sure if there's any truth to them, but that they may be inserting Punk into this situation as a guest referee, which I think I would be all for.
Love that.
Yeah.
Well, part of me would love that, and part of me wouldn't, because the story right now is that Punk is going to be out until his injury's healed, and then he's coming for McIntyre. So the part of me that says, I don't know if we need that, keeps him out of the match as a referee, because why would you ruin it there? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's just, it's getting them in the same ring together. If there's going to be no real physicality, what's the point? I would almost rather Punk sits out and just reminds him, I'm coming for you, I'm coming for you. But, I mean, from a star power standpoint, and for CM Punk's pocketbook, obviously being a special referee would be a nice little PO at the end of the day. So, I mean, I'm for it and I'm against it.
Yeah.
And I'm for it because, again, I like to see people get to do what they want and get to be what they want. At the same time, I think that it helps the Drew storyline if Punk doesn't actually do anything until he's ready to do something.
Yeah, understood. It does kind of remind me of when Shawn Michaels, I think, was refereeing a match with Edge when he was questioning like his refereeing abilities, but also like he kind of assumed that he was going to do something to play into Edge getting eliminated. I think it was an Elimination Chamber match, and which did end up happening. But in this scenario, I think it would work because not only is Punk tied with Drew, but he also has ties and issues with Seth.
Yeah.
So
well, that's just it. There is a story to tell there, but I mean, they are mentioning him on TV still. He is going to be on Raw, so we'll see if it's just a one-off thing because they're in Chicago and they want to sell tickets, or if it's because they actually want to build a story out of this thing. Anything is possible, right?
Yeah. And then also announced is the ladder match for the tag team titles featuring both Raw and SmackDown talent. It's interesting how this whole thing is being structured because I took it to mean from the qualifiers on SmackDown last week, it seems that both of the teams that qualified will be facing each other for a spot as opposed to automatically qualifying, which we saw on Raw. Is there kind of like confusion in that sense as to how like teams are qualifying now?
I don't know. If that's how they're going to do it, that's how they're going to do it. On Raw, I don't know if they have as many tag teams on Raw, do they? That might be a part of it, is that they just might have more people on SmackDown to go through. I mean, however you get there, you get there. I mean, in a way, it's kind of interesting because it shows two different, quote, management styles, right? If Raw and SmackDown are, in fact, two different brands and two different, quote-unquote, general managers, then that's how they would do it, right? So, however you get to the final is you get there. As for the match itself, I don't know. I'm a little worried about it.
Is it in terms of like danger level? You mean?
To a degree, yes. Only because that's now 12 bodies in there that can get seriously hurt. If you've ever listened to me do anything, then you know that I'm not a huge fan of extreme moves just for the sake of extreme moves. I'm not saying that's what this match would be, but anything can go wrong. You know, some of the best injuries happen when guys just trip. You know, so I mean,
understood.
You factor in 12 people with ladders, and who knows what else is going to come out. I mean, it could get nuts. So we'll see what happens.
Well, fingers crossed that everything goes smoothly. Do you think, aside from the injury factor, do you think that 12 people in a single match is just too much?
Yeah, I do. You know, it depends on where you sit with multi-man matches. I think part of it is to get as many people on the card as you can, sure, but I just think from a fan standpoint, either watching on TV, and they'll be able to space it out on TV better. You know, like they always know where they're going when it comes to shooting that stuff. But I think from being a fan in the stands point, unless it's clearly defined with a bunch of people laying out constantly, and think about it, that's 12 people that you're telling me you have to have what? At least 8 of them laid out at all times, you know, doing that thing where they're writhing on the floor while two teams go to work. Either might be too hard to follow or just a little too contrived. But that's me being a nitpicky wrestling fan. Overall, I'm all for championship matches being as simple as possible, unless there's a real reason to have a big stipulation. And this, to me, just seems a little complicated, but
I agree. I think it's just an excuse to get everybody on the card, as you said.
yeah.
But I think there's other ways to do that. Like they could have just added the 2 battle royals instead of this. But I get your point as well. So and then we have the one-on-one brother versus brother match just announced, Jay versus Jimmy, the battle of the Usos. And now it's interesting that this fact was actually pointed out, I think, on social media, that every 15 years they do another brother versus brother match between legit brothers. That is, because we did have
almost every 15 years. The first one was 10 years in,
right?
But since the first one,
I mean, every 15 years since the first one, I meant.
Yeah, I mean, sure, that's kind of a neat coincidence. I think, if nothing else, I don't think it was planned that way by any means, but it's cool. I mean, Jey Uso is a lot more over and a lot more popular, I think, than I thought he was going to be when he started this singles run, which good for him. I think he's doing a great thing. But man, when I watched Raw this past Monday, I couldn't believe how into him they were. And I don't know if they just like moving their arms or not, but it was a lot of Jay, and you can't fake that. You know, you can't say they're piping in crowd noise when you got 14,000 people all doing the same thing. You know, that's a legit reaction. I think that Jimmy's doing a good job being a heel. I don't think this is as good as Brett versus Owen from a personality standpoint. I just don't believe the rivalry is there as much, even though it's the whole bloodline thing and I'm leaving and I'm in. But because even then they're still kind of sympathetic to each other. But I think overall these two guys, they've been wrestling together their whole lives. Of course, they're going to know what to do. So
yeah, for sure.
I think it'll be a fun match. I think it'll be great, and we'll see who comes out on top.
And speaking of that, like who do you think out of the two brothers would benefit more from a win here?
I mean, if I take my brain and turn it into a marketing mode here for a second, I mean, Jay gets the win from a popularity standpoint, but it all depends on how they want to push him. Do they want him to get screwed out of the match and have Jimmy get some elevation? Because if he beats Jimmy now, okay, he's beaten Jimmy. But if he beats Jimmy, who has screwed him out of this and taken him out of that and everything else, then he's beaten somebody. Do you know what I mean? So
understood.
This could be a rivalry that continues on like Brett and Owen did for years, or it could be kind of a thing that fluffs off and flounders out. Because let's face it, you know, everybody talks about that Matt and Jeff match. The Matt and Jeff feud never really amounted to anything. I mean, they tried to stage this vehicular homicide attempt, and it was like, it just got a little too out there.
The whole house fire as well. I remember that.
Yeah, he burned his house down and killed his dog and all this stuff. It's like, come on, what are we doing here? So, I don't know. It all depends on. I think Jimmy could benefit from the win. It'll probably be from some sort of outside interference if that happens. So I think it could keep Jimmy relevant and maybe give Jay a better spot in the chase. But if I just want to sell T-shirts, I'm probably giving it to Jay. So
one match that I am particularly looking forward to is a match just announced as well for the Intercontinental title. Sami Zayn earned his spot against Gunther. It's a fresh matchup. Of all of the 6 choices that you could have had, I think that's the freshest. And also, because they're in Philadelphia, they have an opportunity to tell a real Rocky storyline here, with Sami being the ultimate underdog. My only question is, like, a lot of people seem to be leaning in favor of Chad Gable, and I know that he has the more compelling story at the moment, but I think that Sami's story has yet to be told, and I just don't agree that with the fact that Gable is even involved in this. Do you see him being added to the match in any capacity?
Well, I mean, if we go by their current logic, I mean, Gable could be in there tomorrow. I said it on our show this past week, is that, you know, it could be something where they just slide him in there. Like I said, preferably, I like contests for titles being one-on-one matches. I like those more, but, you know, you bring up an interesting point with Sami Zayn. Could he be the underdog story? I don't know. I don't know, because people love Sami Zayn. The guy has proven himself as a commodity, especially at WrestleMania. I mean, when one of the best matches of the night is Sami Zayn against Johnny Knoxville because he gets that thing over from an entertainment standpoint, it's like, okay, this guy is clearly doing what we want him to do. I think, honestly, Sami goes in and loses. I think they're just they're on too good of a thing with this Gunther thing.
Yeah,
And I think that taking Sammy out would just help Gunther be I like to call Gunther the serious heartbreak kid. Where he'll go out and he'll just shatter all your hopes for, he did it with Gable, he did it with everybody else he's faced so far, and everybody's like, oh, this is going to be the guy to take out Gunther. No, he's not.
I do. Having said that, I do think that Gable will be the eventual person to beat him for that title because his story makes the most sense. But I don't think Sammy is winning anything. But I do think that this can be a compelling story heading into WrestleMania if they go with the whole Rocky angle that I suggested. But I don't ultimately see Gunther and Roman both losing at the same event.
It would be a pretty big change, but then again, WrestleMania 40, it's the renewal of the year for WWE, as we know, so anything can happen. The only thing I question about Gable, and I like Chad Gable a lot, I got to benefit from seeing one of those Chad Gable, Bobby Roode against the Revival matches back when they would just go for almost an hour. I got to see one of those at a live event, and yeah, the guy is great from a wrestling standpoint, keep you in the match, do amazing things, strength, performance, all that. My only thing with Gable is what ends up after the match. If he wins the title, what happens afterwards? Right? And to me, I don't see a story with him. I don't even see a story with Sammy that's as good as the story with Gunther.
Yeah.
Whoever takes 100%. Gunther down is going to be made.
Yeah. I can even see a scenario where Gunther gets to the level where he doesn't even have to lose. He just vacates the title to go after the world title.
Could be.
And then we, of course, have the two women's matches on the card, or the two top women's matches on the card. The first with Io Sky defending against her former teammate in Damage Control, Bayley. I gotta say, I was into this program until the Royal Rumble. I feel like it was booked kind of backwards, where Bayley, where they did the turn after Bayley won the Rumble. They didn't really tease, and prior to the Rumble, she was like a massive heel, which didn't kind of make too much sense to me. How they suddenly just flipped the script after the response that she got.
Yeah, I mean, people haven't wanted to boo Bayley for a long time, though. I feel, anyways. I mean, she's the most established star in this thing. She's the one that resonates with the fans the most. She can turn on a dime, in my mind, and they finally did it, What comes out of this, I really don't know. I feel like she's done a lot to elevate the other women, for sure. Mm-hmm. She's actually done what a lot of people say they'll do and don't. And even with Dakota Kai, there's another example of someone who, given the opportunity and can stay healthy, could be a major factor in a couple of years here. But I don't know. I mean, you have to get there somehow, and not every match is going to be perfectly built and perfectly booked and everything. But I mean, I still think it's a solid. You got a solid name. You got someone you love in Bayley, and you've got a dastardly heel champion now that's going to use all their friends to help her try and keep the title. So
yeah. And of course, Asuka is now out with an injury. I don't know how much of a factor that she'll be playing into this match. But I ultimately think that Io probably would benefit more from a win here than Bayley, because I think Bayley is going to remain over regardless, whether win or lose. Whereas Io's championship run has been kind of underwhelming to me thus far. She just hasn't hit that stride yet. But I've heard, there's a lot of competition in the women's division now, so it could go either way. I've heard even rumors that Julia from Stardom is on her way to WWE.
Sure, but don't forget, they've also got two big players in the can. You've got Jade Cargill on standby, and you got Charlotte Flair sitting around waiting to get back from her injury, right? So, I mean, not to dismiss anything against Julia, but I mean, compared to the two I just mentioned, from a star power component alone, and from what fans from around North American base especially are going to drive to. I mean, you got two big players there. I mean, who knows where Cargill's at, and who knows how long until Charlotte's back, but I think you got two big names for Io to get through if she does retain. Then than worrying about Julia coming in just yet, because we got to get Kairi Sane over first. We got to get all these other these other secondaries over first. But bringing in Julia right now, I mean, I could see her going to NXT maybe, but I wouldn't bank on her coming in on the main roster right now, because it's just too good. You've got too many major players there. Bianca Belair's there. You've got so many that are certified moneymakers. Mm-hmm. So they don't need to throw any new ingredients into the mix right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, NXT definitely could use the help, especially after Stand and Deliver, because if the loser of the women's championship match over there gets called up immediately, I think their roster is like paper thin right now in terms of.
There you go.
Yeah. And then, of course, one of the other big matches on the card, on the other side of the coin, on the Raw side, is the other women's championship match, Rhea Ripley defending against Becky Lynch. This is probably the biggest women's match that I can recall in recent memory, with the two biggest stars probably in the whole industry. I did have a fear at one point that they were going to attempt, and they might still, to add Liv Morgan, Nia Jax to the match, make it a four-way. I think Becky kind of canceled those plans with her victory over Nia this past week. Though I don't know why the two of them are even need to be involved in this to begin with.
I think for after programs, I think that, the one thing I've noticed since the changes that have happened with creative is that you're getting a lot of secondary contenders now, which you didn't have before. It was always focused on, and maybe that's your WWE brain kicking in from what we're used to seeing, where it's like it's always these two, and then we're going to add these two. And maybe that's what's happening with Chad Gable, to go back to that match too. Maybe Gable doesn't get added to this match, but he becomes the after guy,
right.
And I think that Liv and Nia, I think Nia is out of that picture for now after losing the last woman standing match, but having those names kind of percolating and having them just on the standby, that's always a good place to have people, because again, if someone does go down to serious injury, then you got somebody else that can come right in. And we had that with Drew McIntyre, for goodness sake. None of us knew the Punk was going to get hurt. Right. But Drew was already kind of festering around in there a little bit, and then they had him as a plan B to bring in. So I think it's really smart. I think it's a new way to do things. I think a lot of us are just getting used to it. And whether or not Liv and Nia get added to the match, I think is irrelevant at this point, because I don't think it's going to happen at all. I think that they're just keeping them in that standby role for what's coming up after, which again is something that I think WWE has needed for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. So of the two of them, I mean, is this the right time and the right opponent for Rhea to lose to?
I don't know. You think she's going to lose?
I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I think she can. I think either of them can afford a loss at this point. And I think if Rhea does lose, they could still have her win Money in the Bank and get right back into the title picture. So I don't think this hurts either one of them. In fact, I think probably Rhea loses, and then the whole Judgment Day breaks up post WrestleMania.
Interesting.
Once they all lose their belts.
Well, see, because I kind of saw that happening with
Bloodline.
With Judgment Day for sure.
Yeah.
Like I see them losing their title and the whole thing falling apart. But I don't know. Rhea Ripley is cash money right now. Like there's no bigger, more popular, more believable woman on their roster right now, because she's got it all.
Yeah.
She can work, she can talk, she's got the look, she's got the charisma through the ear, and people love her. People around the world legitimately love her. So yeah, she's the cool heel right now, but I mean, honestly, she's going to be a megastar. I had this conversation with Meltzer, and I asked him flat out, I said, do you think that she could hit Dwayne Johnson levels? Not now, but maybe in like 10 years, And I think the answer is yes. I think that they've got something major there that if she wants to do it, she can do whatever she wants.
Yeah. No,
so
I agree.
I don't even know if she loses, but
I don't. Obviously, she's not at Dwayne Johnson level right now, but she's still a massive star. She's probably like the biggest star as I said, in the industry right now in terms of the women. Maybe even not even the women. Like to maybe top 5 stars in wrestling in general.
Well, she's becoming one of the most popular. I don't know from a street level recognition. Like if I held a picture up at the mall and said, "Hey, who's this?" I don't know if that would get it, but I think that from a wrestling fan standpoint, yeah, people get most excited to see her. So
Yeah, for sure. So I always look at it like in terms of person A versus person B. I always look at it like who has the most compelling story post WrestleMania. And right now they've kind of teased a few different scenarios with Becky Lynch, but they really haven't teased anything with Rhea yet because she's pretty much mowed through the whole locker room. I mean, they still have the potential rematch with Charlotte when she returns. They have Jade Cargill, who she's never faced, Bianca Belair, the one-on-one match. They still have Bayley, but they really haven't teased anything with any of those women for her yet, like in the immediate future. So that's kind of the reason I think that Becky is going to win, because at least they have all these programs immediately lined up for her.
Yeah, maybe. I also think Becky's got a book tour to go on, so maybe she needs some time away.
That's true too. That's very true as well. Okay, so and then of course on the Friday following WrestleMania SmackDown, we have the Hall of Fame. Do you think this is it, or do we get more names at some point?
I don't know. The internet was abuzz about Leah Maivia going in, so that could be another name going in, and then there will be Legacy Wing again. They'll drop like 10 names out of nowhere and they'll just throw them in. I think it's a solid class right now.
Yeah.
Like, to be honest with you, I mean,
for sure.
You got Muhammad Ali, for crying out loud. That's no slouch. Paul Heyman could probably give an hour-long speech alone.
Yeah.
I hope he doesn't.
Forward to that one.
But it could be something incredible there. Bray Wyatt's the other name that everybody's talking about, right?
Yeah.
So I could see that being the last one to go in, and I think they do that when they announce, or just before the documentary drops.
Right.
So I think honestly that's probably, if there's going to be any left, it'll be those two for the main stage, Leah Maivia and Bray. But I mean, having him and his dad go in at the same time, I mean, what a heartbreak for Mike Rotundo. But at the same time, it's like it's kind of fitting in a way too. So who knows?
I mean, I can see them doing the documentary in place of him going in the Hall of Fame this year, and maybe saving him to headline next year's class.
Could be that too.
Any like of everybody announced thus far? Any surprise? Anything that sticks out? Like any surprises?
Not really. I mean, we've talked ad nauseum now about Thunderbolt Patterson. I was surprised by that for the historical reason, and even seeing how they're presenting him now. They're presenting him as a talker and an influential character. But I think for the wrestling fans that don't know anything about him, I think that's a good way to introduce him. And then if you want to dig deeper, or if you know the history, then great. I've never understood people that want to complain about people that get inducted into the Hall of Fame. It's a thing. It's like everything else. It's made to draw our attention and draw some money. Yes, it's a quote honor, but it's not gospel. It's one company's vision of who they want to honor. It's like anything else. So if we just don't take it so seriously, who cares? I mean, I'm one of the few people that was fine with most of the celebrity induction, because it's like, who cares? I was there the year that Trump got inducted, for crying out loud. And it was like, of all the things, and I got to interview Mick Foley about it a couple of years afterwards, and he finds it hilarious that he was inducted the same year as Donald Trump was, and he actually, I think he honestly wears a bit of a black mark on his nomination or his induction, but overall, I mean, who cares? It's one company's thing. They can do whatever they want with it, and again, nothing that happens in the Hall of Fame is going to change any of our lives except for the people that are in it, because they get a little more cash or they get a little more notoriety, and that's it. So
like to me, I agree with you. It's not my Hall of Fame, so I don't really have any personal investment in it. They can put in whoever they want. I always enjoy it, and I don't think anybody has been it's hard. It's not for us to say like who's deserving and who's undeserving of this recognition.
Who made WWE the most money? That's going to be the top people. And then after that, anybody else, like guys like Thunderbolt, who never wrestled for WWE, it's just considered a recognition. So take the recognition, be happy with it, and move on.
Yeah. And then, of course, speaking of making money, we have the two big matches headlining night one and night two. First, with the tag match, The Rock making his much anticipated return, or maybe not so anticipated, considering the fan reaction, but he will be making his return as part of the Bloodline, teaming with Roman Reigns against Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins on night one. And then the title match between Cody and Roman, the rematch, is on night two. Now, first of all, this whole scenario, like how this all came about with Cody giving up his spot initially after winning the Royal Rumble and then kind of wanting to take it back because claiming that The Rock politicked his way into the title picture. Do you think that was all by design, or was their hand kind of forced based on the negative fan reaction?
We've had this debate on McGuire on Wrestling. I've talked about it with the ACT guys. Honestly, I'm going to go with the fact that there was a plan. I don't think for a second that the plan was ever to have Rock versus Roman at WrestleMania. I think how they changed things over was clunky, but I think that they realized, look, we got a real chance to make something really special happen here. Let's make it different. Let's make it convoluted. Plus, they had to call an audible because all the Vince stuff was going on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The fact that WWE has come through virtually unscathed to this point, because let's face it, there hasn't even been a court appearance, right? So, I mean, take the company side out of it. Wrestling could have had the biggest black eye on it, and I mean all wrestling, because people don't differentiate WWE, AEW, NWA, TNA. People in the mainstream just think wrestling is wrestling. They don't know that it's all different companies and different owners. They just think it's all wrestling. So for WWE to skirt away from this and be able to focus on their product on TV, there are going to be people that argue the morality of that. But what else are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to shut all the shows down? Are they supposed to just be in mourning and say, like, yeah, Vince McMahon was a real piece of crap human being.
Right.
I guess we're just going to stop functioning because if that was the case, there'd be no NFL, no MLB, no NBA, no nothing. If we were to base on ownership, okay, 2 words, Marge Shot. Okay, to go way back on you for a reference, right? I mean, that team still exists, but it's one of those things where we now see how WWE is able to get their fans to focus on their product and do it in a way where we, and I don't mean we as in every single person, but we as a collective wrestling fandom will focus more of our attention on what they're putting on TV than what's going on in real life now, because at the end of it, we find it that interesting. We find it just interesting enough, whether you think it's interesting because you love the story, whether you think it's interesting because that's how they're geeking out of talking about Vince McMahon, whether you think it's interesting because, oh, this is neat, it's wrestling. They're doing what they do.
Right.
So to either have it be Plan A, Dwayne Johnson's on the board now, and he's going to put himself in the main event, or Plan B, Dwayne Johnson's on the board now, and he's going to do this contrived story with Cody Rhodes about taking his spot and then giving it back, and that. Whatever the outcome was, I think those were 2 solid plans that may have come from online feedback, but I mean, we've seen this before. Pro wrestling is trying very hard to give its fans what they want, but they're also learning that they can't give them everything they want, because if they do,
exactly,
then people get bored of it, because I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I couldn't have said it better myself. And with that said, so the tag match obviously is going to have ramifications on the singles match, of course, as already announced. Do you think that the result of the tag match will kind of telegraph the result of the title match?
That's a good question. I mean, if you'd asked us a year ago, Cody Rhodes was already going to be the champion, and this would have been over, so it wouldn't have mattered. And that's what I mean. Like, I didn't think for a second that Cody was actually going to win the title last WrestleMania. So
me neither.
To think that I know what's going to happen now,
yeah.
I mean, it could be interesting either way. I think from a from a struggle standpoint, it could be interesting to see the bloodline rules thing. But I think in a show that has so many gimmick matches and so much stuff going on already, I think it might actually take away from it a bit. So, I guess what you're asking is if Cody loses the tag match, or if Cody and Seth lose the tag match, does Cody lose the title? I mean, realistically, it could, but I think what you're describing is exactly the paradox they want us to think.
Mm.
If they lose the tag match, does this mean Cody's going to lose on night 2 or not? I don't know how to answer that, because that's legitimately the question they want us to have in our head. So, I mean, it's a great question. Don't get me wrong. It's just I literally don't know, because this is the great thing about it.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of works in a sense where if the Bloodline wins, they're going to be involved in the title match, and that makes Cody even more sympathetic as a babyface to come back from behind and win the title. But if the Bloodline loses, they're heels, and they're going to do what heels do, which is go against their word and interfere in the title match anyway.
Maybe this is where one of these other Anoa'i family members show up, or the Fatu family members show up, and maybe that's how they get in. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Well, we said no bloodline, but these guys aren't bloodline. They're just
right.
they just happen to be related, but they're not in the they're not in the contract. It could be anything. It could be anything, and I mean, I could sit here and speculate, but this is why I don't do prediction shows, because I've always been bad at predictions, like record bad. Like, I would host prediction lists as we do with our friends when we have like a pay-per-view party, and I would always lose. I won one out of like 30 parties I held. it was by total fluke, but I don't know, man. I like the way you're thinking about it, though. Like, what's it going to be? And if it really is no bloodline, will it really be no bloodline? Or will they find a way to skirt around it? Or will it just be a straight wrestling match? Don't forget, this is WrestleMania 40. That number means something.
Yeah.
Go back to what happened in WrestleMania 20. Take the figures out of it, But the fact that we have these championship matches and we had 2 celebrated champions by the end of the night, that's a big deal. WrestleMania 10, you could say the same thing. These WrestleMania 30 with Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan. I mean, these tent-pole WrestleManias, I think the title matches get treated with a little more integrity, a little more. Let's keep it about the belt and keep it about the championship. But who knows? I could be completely wrong here. Yeah. I probably am.
I do think if Cody wins, they need to go all out with the celebration, like they did with Bryan Danielson, like they did with Bret Hart, where they have like the whole lot, maybe the top names come out to help celebrate. They do the whole pyro and confetti and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Or the exact opposite. They just elevate him as the guy alone in the ring, and he's just with the people. Because that's one thing that we didn't see back in the day of Bret. And it wasn't really till DDP, I think, that we really saw people who would go out and really celebrate among the fans. I mean, Hogan would have these set up things.
Right.
But I mean, as far as like jumping the rail and just being out there with the people, that's something that I really credit Dallas Page for a lot, because he was the first guy to really do that on a major level. I'm sure there were guys and girls that did it before him, but you'd see him on TV every week and he'd be with the people. So, I don't know, man. But I would love that too. I would love to see everybody come out, round of applause, and maybe Seth loses his title early in the night and then kicks him in the head. Who knows? I mean, it's all fun, man. To me, it's just, I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to WrestleMania this year.
Me too.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it with you here, because I don't get to. On my show, it's pretty structured where, it's like I got the news, and then I'll have Dave on, and Dave can sometimes go for a half an hour alone. So then it's like, okay, that's done, and then sometimes I'll have an interview, and then I might have a little commentary piece, but it's usually just me bouncing off feedback from everybody else, which is great. Don't get me wrong, I love it. And I do that, A, to save time, and B, to save hassling all my friends. Hey, come on the show. But I love doing this, man. This is what I live for, is to talk about wrestling. So I just got off my morning show, had a great time there, and we're set up to do this, and it's like, it's a cakewalk for me, man. You're like, thanks for doing me the favor. It's like, dude, you're giving me the chance to talk about wrestling, so I'm having a blast.
Yeah, appreciate it, and love to have you on again in the future. So that is our WrestleMania discussion. WrestleMania, of course, April 6th and 7th. By the time you guys listen to this, the following week, I will, of course, be recapping the event or all the events, actually, of WrestleMania weekend. And I want to thank McGuire for joining me.
Oh, thank you, man. And please spread the word. And if you're not following McGuire on wrestling already, please do that. And I'll be sure to give your pod a follow here. So make sure you send me a link when we're done here so I can get the word out. And man, this is what it should be. You know, we're all wrestling fans, and I always think back to what Sting said in an interview once, and that is that, you know, why do wrestling fans complain so much? Because we care. And we can say we don't care, but we care about it. We love it. And that's why we do this. So, honestly, man, thank you for the time. I really do appreciate it. And, anytime, man. Drop me a line. We'll make it happen.
Amen to that. And we'll look forward to talking about wrestling again next week. Take care, everybody, and have a great week as we head into the biggest show of the year.